What if the most effective, actionable repair manual for your mental health wasn't actually written by a team of neuroscientists in some sterile laboratory?
Right, which is what we usually expect.
Exactly. But what if it was written by a bunch of exhausted comedy writers, just sitting in a windowless room trying to hit a deadline?
It sounds totally absurd on its face.
Yeah.
I mean, we're conditioned to look to the halls of academia for the schematic diagrams of our own minds.
Yeah, we want the science to feel weighty.
Right. We want it to be as serious as the psychological problems we're trying to solve. You know, double-blind studies, peer-reviewed medical journals, all of that.
And yet today's deep dive is going to prove that some of the most profound, scientifically validated strategies for literally rewiring your brain are hiding in plain sight.
Right there in popular culture.
Exactly. So we're pulling from this brilliant piece in Psychology Today by Dr. David Hellerstein. He's a psychiatrist at Columbia University. And his personal backstory actually makes this entire premise even more compelling.
The backstory is crucial here. So Dr. Hellerstein grew up in a leafy, perfectly ordinary Midwestern suburb in the 1960s. But his household had this one major caveat.
Oh, this part is wild.
Yeah. His parents treated television the way, some people today treat astrology or like dubious extended warranties. They firmly believed it was inherently destructive.
They were totally convinced that TV literally rots the human mind. So instead of zoning out in front of a screen like basically every other kid on the block.
Right, watching cartoons.
Yeah. He and his 5 siblings were raised on this strict, supposedly brain-enhancing diet of books, DC Comics, and, of all things, Mad Magazine.
Which, I mean, as you can imagine, completely alienated them from basically every Monday morning conversation at school.
I can't even imagine trying to talk about Mad Magazine while everyone else is discussing weekend TV.
Right. And he actually admits to sneaking his television fix, catching these illicit glimpses of Bonanza and Bewitched on flickering screens in his friends' basements.
The sheer irony of his professional trajectory is it's hard to overstate. Because fast forward a few decades, and this same kid, who was so carefully shielded from the mind-rotting effects of television, is now a highly respected, internet-wired psychiatrist.
He streams BritBox, Criterion, Netflix, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, but more importantly, his clinical practice has completely flipped his parents' philosophy right on its head.
It really has, because he found that the most useful, resonant clinical concepts, the ones he actually uses with his patients to help them break out of depressive cycles, they rarely come from those dense medical journals.
No, they're mapped out perfectly in the writers' rooms of classic sitcoms and movies.
It is a profound paradigm shift, honestly. It takes the media we consume as just, passive entertainment and repositions it as a highly accurate, accessible map of human psychology.
So if you are listening to this right now and you're feeling stuck in a rut, or you're completely overwhelmed by the state of the world, or honestly, if you just love a good pop culture epiphany, we are going to equip you with an entirely new lens for viewing the heavy machinery inside your own head.
It's a great toolkit.
It really is. And to start, we have to look at the most relatable symptom of a stuck brain, which is making terrible daily decisions. And for this, we turn to the absolute patron saint of neurosis, George Costanza.
Oh, man. The ultimate case study in self-sabotage.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to set the scene. It's a very famous 1994 episode of Seinfeld. George Costanza is sitting in a diner, and he is hit with this moment of just crushing, painful self-awareness.
A rare moment for George, honestly.
Truly. He looks across the table and announces that every single decision he has ever made in his entire life has been wrong. His life is the exact opposite of everything he wants it to be.
And Jerry Seinfeld delivers a line of pure, almost accidental psychiatric genius. He tells George, if every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
And the brilliance of the episode is that George actually tests the hypothesis.
He does?
He usually orders tuna, so he orders chicken salad. He sees a beautiful woman he would normally be terrified to approach, walks right up to her, and with completely disarming, almost reckless honesty says, "My name is George, I'm unemployed, and I live with my parents."
And she is instantly charmed. By the end of the episode, he lands a dream job working for the New York Yankees.
Which is amazing, but I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Because as a viewer, my immediate reaction is that this is just a very well-written comedy bit. Telling a clinically depressed or deeply anxious person to just do the opposite of what they feel, isn't that just ignoring the dashboard warning lights in your car and hoping the engine fixes itself?
What's fascinating here is that it feels like an oversimplification until you look at the neurobiology of what is actually happening in a depressed or anxious brain.
Okay, so what is happening?
Well, there's a specific network in your brain called the default mode network, or DMN. And neuroscientists have established that when a person is depressed, this network becomes hyperactive.
Wait, the default mode network, is that literally the brain's screensaver mode? Like, what is it actually doing when I'm just sitting at a diner not really focusing on anything?
It's less like a passive screensaver and more like a highly active, relentless simulator. It's the region of the brain responsible for rumination and mental time travel.
Mental time travel.
When your DMN is running hot, it constantly pulls you backward to analyze past regrets and then flings you forward to simulate future catastrophes.
Oh, wow. So it's just a constant loop of anxiety.
Exactly. It generates these punishing, looping thoughts like, I always fail, or they won't like me, or this is going to end badly.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And Dr. Hellerstein emphasizes that these thoughts are not character flaws. They are the result of a biological glitch. It's a literal traffic jam in very specific neural circuits.
So the behavioral result of that biological traffic jam is what? Just freezing up entirely?
The clinical term is harm avoidance.
Harm avoidance.
Right. When your brain is stuck in that hyperactive DMN loop, its primary overriding goal becomes protecting you from further emotional pain. So you start avoiding normal, incredibly low-risk situations.
Like talking to someone at a diner.
Yes, you stay home, you order the exact same sandwich, you don't talk to the stranger. And the insidious part is, even after the heaviest fog of depression lifts, that neural pathway of harm avoidance has been deeply reinforced.
Ah, so it's like a habit.
Exactly. You keep isolating simply because the brain has wired itself to say no.
Which brings us right back to George ordering the chicken salad. How does doing the opposite actually fix that biological traffic jam?
By understanding a core rule of neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together.
Right.
Every time you obey that instinct to avoid, you send an electrical signal down that specific neural pathway, making it thicker, faster, and more automatic. In clinical psychology, countering this operates on the principles of behavioral activation therapy.
So you are physically starving the old pathway of its electrical reinforcement.
You are. When George orders the chicken salad instead of the tuna, or introduces himself instead of hiding, he's forcing his brain to recruit entirely new neural pathways.
Wow. He isn't waiting to feel better first.
No, he isn't waiting for a grand internal transformation or for his DMN to calm down before he acts. The novel action itself is what interrupts the looping circuit.
That makes so much sense. So for someone listening right now, when your internal compass is reliably pointing you into isolation, doing the opposite isn't a joke. You are deliberately firing new neurons to break the gridlock.
Exactly. It's a biological intervention disguised as a sitcom trope.
But, you know, it's relatively easy to order chicken salad instead of tuna when you're just fighting your own ego in a diner.
Sure, small stakes.
Yeah. But when your default mode network starts latching on to objective, terrifying realities, like the fact that the universe is literally expanding, or that global events are spiraling, a simple behavioral swap won't cut it. You can't just do the opposite of the cosmos.
No, you definitely can't.
We need to transition from the micro dread of a lunch order to the macro dread of existence.
We are moving from behavioral gridlock to existential paralysis.
Exactly. And for this, Dr. Hellerstein points us to a completely different cinematic masterpiece, the opening of the movie Annie Hall.
Such a classic scene.
It really is. We see a young Elvis singer sitting in a doctor's office in Brooklyn, and he is flat out refusing to do his long division homework, his reasoning. He read in a book that the universe is expanding.
And if the universe is eventually going to fly apart and end, what is the point of doing his homework?
All right. His mother is furious, of course, but the psychiatrist leans in and delivers a profoundly grounded response. He says, "It won't be expanding for billions of years, Alfie, and we've got to enjoy ourselves while we're here."
It's such a brilliant, relatable moment.
Because I think everyone listening has had a day where doing the dishes or paying a parking ticket or sending a mundane email suddenly feels completely absurd against the backdrop of infinity.
Right, the what's the point of it all feeling.
Exactly. But the universe is expanding. The climate is changing. There are massive, uncontrollable forces at play.
Isn't the psychiatrist just telling the kid to put his blinders on? I mean, is the medical advice seriously just willful ignorance?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is not about ignorance. It is about understanding how anxiety manipulates our perception of scale.
Scale, like how
Yeah.
big or small we see things.
Exactly. In cognitive behavioral therapy, there is a concept known as a cognitive distortion, specifically one called magnification.
Okay, magnification.
Right. Dr. Hellerstein notes that this cosmic dread is the ultimate cognitive distortion. When you are highly anxious, your brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, starts scanning for danger.
Looking for lions in the bushes.
Exactly. But if your immediate environment is relatively safe, that hyperactive system will pull the camera back further and further until it finds a threat big enough to justify the anxiety you are feeling.
So it bypasses the safety of the living room and locks onto the heat death of the universe. Precisely. You start trying to operate at an unworkably vast resolution. You're applying the scale of the cosmos to the scale of Tuesday morning.
Wow.
And at that vast resolution, no ordinary human action seems worth taking. Evolutionarily, our brains were designed to manage the local environment, gathering food, maintaining social bonds, securing shelter.
Not worrying about galaxies.
Right. We're not neurologically equipped to process the weight of the expanding universe while trying to do long division.
So the psychological intervention here isn't to debate the astrophysics. Like, the doctor isn't trying to prove Alvy wrong about space.
No, not at all.
The intervention is a deliberate scale adjustment.
Yes. The intervention is recognizing that your camera is pulled out too far. The therapeutic takeaway for you, the listener, is to actively force the lens back to a human scale.
Which is so hard to do when you're spiraling.
It is, but you have to remind yourself Brooklyn is not expanding. The room you are in right now is not flying apart. The next 5 minutes exist. Focus purely on the workable present.
Brooklyn is not expanding. I love that. I want to linger on that because shrinking the map to the workable present makes a lot of sense.
It's very grounding.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What if you've successfully shrunk the map? You are looking only at the next 5 minutes, but your biological machine is still completely frozen.
Like you're locally present, but still stuck.
Yeah. Your brain feels like a locked-up computer screen. How do you practically fix that? Well, according to the sources, you treat it exactly like a bad Wi-Fi router.
This might be the most practical, universally applicable map in the entire deep dive.
It's brilliant. Dr. Hellerstein brings up the British sitcom The IT Crowd.
Oh, Roy.
Yes, there's this wonderfully deadpan technician named Roy Treneman, and he is so exhausted by the constant phone calls from people with broken computers that he keeps a tape recorder by his desk.
Just a physical tape recorder.
Right. And every time the phone rings, he just hits play, and the recording says, "Hello, IT. Have you tried turning it off and on again?"
The mundane miracle of the system reboot.
We laugh at it, but it highlights a massive double standard. I mean, we treat our electronics infinitely better than our own minds.
It's so true.
If my laptop freezes, I don't yell at it. I don't sit there psychoanalyzing its childhood to figure out why the mouse won't move. I just hold the power button and reboot it.
Right, you just reset the hardware.
Exactly. But when our brains freeze, when we are anxious, depressed, or unable to focus, we expect them to just keep grinding. We keep 100 mental tabs open, we drink more coffee, we sleep 4 hours, and we are shocked when the system keeps crashing.
This double standard exists because we tend to view mental friction as a moral failing or like a lack of willpower.
Right. We think we just need to push through it.
But again, neuroscience tells a very different story. Think about how habits and mental states are formed. We talked about neural pathways earlier. Those deep grooves are worn into our circuitry by sheer repetition.
But those grooves can get corrupted, right? Just like a software file.
They get deeply corrupted. Let's look at the biology of stress. When you are chronically stressed or sleep-deprived, your brain is flooded with cortisol, and a neurochemical called adenosine builds up.
Adenosine, that's the stuff that makes you tired.
Yes, it creates that intense feeling of sleep pressure and brain fog. These chemicals literally impair the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical thinking and impulse control.
Oh, wow.
You aren't just tired. Your hardware is running a corrupted program in a hostile chemical environment.
So when a psychiatrist looks at a patient who is entirely stuck, years of deep psychoanalysis might not actually be the right first step.
Sometimes the most scientifically valid intervention is exactly what IT suggests, a systematic reboot.
Yeah.
You have to clear the chemical fog before you can analyze the thoughts.
I want to make sure I understand the biology here, because we obviously can't literally unplug our brains from the wall. What does a biological reboot actually look like?
It fundamentally means changing the physiological state to interrupt the corrupted loop.
Give me an example.
Okay, when you prioritize a period of deep restorative sleep, your brain is literally flushing out that adenosine and clearing metabolic waste.
Like emptying the trash folder on a desktop.
Exactly. Or when you engage in intense cardiovascular exercise, you're burning off excess cortisol and stimulating the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Which does what?
It acts like fertilizer for new neural connections. Even a sudden change in physical environment or taking a cold shower forces the nervous system to reset its baseline.
So you're shocking the system a bit.
Yes, you are physically clearing the neurochemical buildup so the system can restart fresh.
So for you listening, if you are staring at a problem and your mind is frozen, stop trying to think your way out of it. Turn off the machine, go to sleep, go for a run, change the room you are sitting in, reboot the hardware so the software can load correctly.
It's essential. But that brings us to a critical threshold. A quick reboot is fantastic for clearing the cache, for fixing a temporary glitch.
Right. But what about the hard drive's operating system itself? What about the deeply ingrained lifelong loops we find ourselves in?
The chronic stuff.
Yeah, I'm talking about the chronic patterns. The terrible relationships we keep choosing, the self-sabotaging career moves, the generational trauma we just can't seem to shake.
Yeah.
To break those, a nap and a cold shower aren't going to cut it. We have to look at the ultimate pop culture time loop.
We have to look at Harold Ramis's 1993 masterpiece.
Groundhog Day.
Yes.
Bill Murray plays Phil Connors. He's this arrogant, deeply cynical, completely self-centered Pittsburgh weatherman who is magically condemned to relive February 2nd in the small town of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, indefinitely.
Over and over and over.
Right. He wakes up every single morning at 6 a.m. to Sonny and Cher playing I Got You Babe on the radio, and the day unfolds exactly the same way no matter what he does.
Dr. Hellerstein considers this film perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated work in the popular canon.
Really? More than actual psychological dramas?
Yes, because it dramatizes the central problem of human change in a way that very few clinical texts ever could.
The psychological progression Phil goes through is fascinating. I mean, over what the director implied to be thousands of iterations of the exact same day, Phil cycles through every known psychological defense mechanism.
He really does.
He starts in pure denial. Then he pivots to hedonism. Stealing money, driving on train tracks, eating garbage, manipulating people, all because there are no consequences.
Right, the acting out phase.
Yeah, and when the novelty of that wears off and leaves him completely empty, he sinks into profound despair and tries to end his life over and over. But finally, slowly, he surrenders to the reality of the loop and starts to change.
He does the work.
He does. He learns to play the piano. He memorizes the complex lives, struggles, and needs of the townspeople he previously despised. He becomes, first reluctantly and then wholeheartedly, a genuinely good person.
And this touches on a profound reality in psychoanalysis. Freud called it the repetition compulsion.
The repetition compulsion.
Right. It is the human tendency to unconsciously recreate painful patterns, destructive relationships, and traumatic scenarios over and over again. We unconsciously seek out what is familiar, even if what is familiar is miserable.
So what does this all mean? Because Phil Connors was literally forced by magic to repeat his days in an unchanging environment. You and I have free will, and we live in a constantly shifting world. Doesn't the fact that our environments change make it drastically harder for the listener to even recognize they are in a loop, let alone break it?
This raises an important question. It does make it much harder to recognize because the faces in the cities change, but the underlying mechanics of our choices remain identical. This is where psychoanalysis meets modern habit formation in the brain. Behaviors that are deeply grooved into our circuitry, usually residing in the basal ganglia, they run completely automatically. They operate far below the level of conscious intention.
So we are all Phil Connors.
Pretty much.
We are waking up to Sonny and Cher, doing the exact same self-destructive things, dating the exact same toxic people, without even realizing the radio is playing the same song.
We are. But the implicit therapy embedded in Groundhog Day aligns perfectly with modern neuroscience. The film argues quite radically that insight alone is fundamentally insufficient.
That is a massive point. Phil realizing he was trapped in a time loop didn't actually free him from the time loop.
Exactly. The same way that knowing why you were sad or understanding theoretically why you sabotage relationships rarely cures the behavior on its own.
Because knowing isn't doing.
Right. Insight happens in the prefrontal cortex, but your habits live in deeper, older brain structures. To bridge that gap, action is required. We talked about neuroplasticity earlier, the brain's ability to change and reorganize itself. But neuroplasticity is not passivity. The circuits only change if we force them to through a process called myelination.
Myelination, how does that work in practice?
When you repeat a new behavior, your brain wraps a fatty substance called myelin around the nerve fibers involved in that behavior. It acts like insulation on a copper wire, making the signal travel faster and more efficiently.
Like greasing the groove.
Exactly. To wear down new grooves, to heavily myelinate a healthier pathway, you have to engage in repeated, varied, persistent action. You have to learn the piano one day at a time.
You have to choose kindness one interaction at a time.
Yes, you have to keep doing the work, thousands of iterations if necessary, until the person waking up the next day is inexplicably better than the person who went to sleep.
It is the ultimate testament to human agency. You might be trapped in a biological or psychological loop, but you hold the hammer and chisel required to slowly carve a new exit.
It's very empowering.
It is. Okay, let's bring all of this together. We have extracted a truly wild, yet completely scientifically validated toolkit for your mental health today, directly from the writer's rooms of Hollywood.
A great summary.
So when your instincts are driving you into a wall of avoidance and isolation, use the Costanza Protocol. Starve that neural pathway and deliberately do the opposite. When the universe feels too vast and heavy and your amygdala is magnifying the threat, shrink the existential map. Remember that Brooklyn isn't expanding, and just conquer the next 5 minutes.
Take a local.
Right. And when your biological hardware is flooded with cortisol and adenosine, don't force it. Use the IT strategy and physically reboot the system. Turn it off and on again.
Get some sleep.
Yeah. And finally, when you find yourself trapped in a destructive, lifelong loop, embrace the Punxsutawney prescription. Trust that persistent, intentional, repeated action will literally myelinate new neural pathways in your brain.
It brings us full circle to Dr. Hellerstein's father, actually.
Well, right, the TV rots the mind guy.
Yeah, he firmly believed that television was fundamentally deleterious to the human mind. And, he wasn't entirely wrong about the addictive nature of the medium.
Sure, binge watching is real.
But he missed the profound human element underneath. These comedy writers, just trying to hit deadlines, reflect society, and get a laugh, inadvertently mapped out some of the most accessible, profound guides to human neuroplasticity, cognitive behavioral therapy, and existential healing we have.
Not bad for a medium that was supposed to rot the mind. It turns out the repair manual for the complex machine of the brain was broadcast in prime time. Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought for you to take away from this deep dive.
Something to mull over.
Exactly. We've talked extensively about how your brain is constantly being shaped by the unconscious loops, the chemical environments, and the automatic habits of your daily routine. So, thinking about that heavy machinery in your head right now, what is one small, entirely out-of-character action you could take tomorrow that might inadvertently start rewiring your reality?
Start small, but make it count.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.